Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, January 19th, 2022. It is 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which means it is time for Women in Business. Today, we're going to be talking about caregiving and women. And as with a lot of things that I do talk about on this show, this is something that has impacted me sort of recently. So I started looking into it a little bit. And once I did, I realized that, gee, this is maybe something that we need to talk about because caregiving has a big impact on women. It has an impact on their earning potential, it has an impact on their health. And a lot of women in our age group, so to speak, um, you know, 40s to 50s, may be also in a situation where they're caring for elderly parents or elderly relatives that have issues, health issues, or cognitive issues, or whatever it is. And they're also caring for children. So you can be they call it the sandwich generation, which is kind of a scary little nickname a little bit, but it's also true. You can be caught between the demands of your family or your children and also the demands of elderly relatives or parents who may need to be looked after. So there's a lot to unpack in this issue. There's a lot to unpack in terms of the disproportionate amount of women who are handling most of the caregiving responsibilities, which is something that this is not to say that men don't caretake, but you're going to see me grab pieces of paper every once in a while because I do have some stats that I want to read. It's according to surveys, and it is estimated that 66%, excuse me, of caregivers are female. And it's also estimated that the percentage of caregivers who do like daily tasks that require time and effort and energy, those tend to be women as well. The people who do the healthcare tasks, who run IVs or make sure people get fed or whatever it is that they need to do. When men caregive, it tends to be more at a remove. Now, this is not across the board, of course, but they tend to do things like handle financial information, maybe work on getting someone into an assisted living facility or a nursing home or something like that. So most of the on the ground, I will take you shopping, I will take you to the doctor, I will make sure you have a meal, I will make sure that you're getting sleep or whatever it is. All that sort of stuff, a lot of that disproportionately, 66% as they say here, tends to be done by women. So that's kind of the first thing that we need to get a little bit straight in our heads is that we're not saying that men aren't caretakers. Men do, and there are probably men who are doing the physical on the ground caretaking. When my mother had cancer and she was in the end stages, my stepdad did that for her. So I know that it does happen, but proportionately, based on the statistics that we have, most of the caregivers are women. So that's something that any legislation, any kind of program, anything that has to do with caregiving is going to impact women perhaps more than it would men. So that's something that we really need to take into account. What I think a lot of people don't understand is that caregiving is very demanding. And if you've ever done it, and I was one of the primary caregivers for my mother when she was ill and subsequently passed on. And it's demanding. It's emotionally demanding, it's physically demanding. You're dealing with a situation that's very hard with a person who is dealing with, illness. They could have cognitive issues. They're scared. They're emotionally needy. There's all sorts of things, and you're trying to deal with that, and also deal with having a job and maintaining your own mental and physical health, and doing whatever else it is that you need to do. If you have a romantic relationship, you need to pay attention to that. If you have kids, you need to pay attention to that. So the whole thing becomes this big mess of conflicting demands on you, and you need to deal with all of it. And I'm sorry, as often happens when I do solo shows, I guess because I talk more, my voice gets all squeaky. Can you hear it? So I had to stop. I do think it's cool that I'm using my Sleep In for Good mug today because that was a mental health program that Promo Cares did, and I really like that. So let's look at some stats here. The value of informal care that women provide ranges from $148 billion to $188 billion annually. So let's just wrap our heads around that for a minute. If you were paying someone to do what women do unpaid every day, then you'd be paying them billions and billions of dollars annually to do it. And that's why a lot of the times the women who are doing this are doing it uncompensated. And they're not and I want to make this really clear. When you're caregiving for someone who is a family member, somebody you care about, a friend that you love, you're not thinking about it in terms of, I should be compensated for this. You're thinking about it in someone I care about needs care, and it's my privilege to be able to do that for them. And there's also a big, weird as it is, because we aren't multi-generational families like we used to be when, back in the early 1900s or whatever. But there's still a cultural expectation that you will take care of elderly people in your family if they need care, or ill people in your family if they need care, unless you are estranged from your family for some reason, which that's something we'll talk about a little further in this conversation. But I mean, just try to wrap your head around billions, like hundreds of billions of dollars that is in care that is being given by people who are also trying to run businesses and have jobs and have a social life and have a family and have a romantic life and everything else. And I'm laughing. I'm assuming this is Carolyn. I don't know why Facebook won't show me her name. But Carolyn says she wants a raise, and Lisa Shaw also says, good afternoon, I need a raise too. And it's funny, but it's not, because the other half of this situation is that while you're caregiving, you're also voluntarily giving up other opportunities that you might have. And if you want to talk about some of those, let's see. Women who are family caregivers are 2.5 more times likely than non-caregivers to live in poverty, and 5 times more likely to receive supplemental security income, SSI, which is Social Security, basically. And also, furthermore, a 2011 study by MetLife found that 23% of non-working and 20% of working female caregivers were also providing financial assistance to parents that they are caring for. So let's think about that for a minute. Not only are they providing a level of unpaid care that's enormously expensive, some women are voluntarily sacrificing a bit of their own potential earning income to take care of somebody else that they're never going to recoup. Because, I mean, okay, possibly, potentially, there might be an inheritance, but really, nobody's doing it for that reason. Or most likely they're not doing it for that reason. And most likely whatever inheritance there isn't going to compensate for the lost wages, the lost earning potential, all those sorts of things. So that's something to look at too. And let's see, a national study on women in caregiving highlighted the conflicting demands of work and elder care. The study found that 33% of working women decreased work hours, 29% passed up a job promotion, training, or assignment, 22% took a leave of absence, 20% switched from full-time to part-time employment, 16% quit their jobs, and 13% retired early. And there's another stat here that says that caregiving reduces paid work hours for middle-aged women by 41%. Now, that's alarming if you're working for someone else and are losing wages. It's doubly alarming if you are like a lot of people in our industry and you're running your own business and then trying to, if you lose half of your, almost half, 41% is pretty damn close to 50%. So if you lose half of your available work time in any given week because you're caregiving for someone, that's a hell of a sacrifice. That's a lot of potential that's being lost. And again, I'm not saying that this is something that people shouldn't do. I'm not saying that anyone who's doing it is resenting it. I'm just saying there's a lot of cost to this. So that's something that we really need to be aware of, that if you are caretaking for someone, there's a lot of cost involved with doing it. And it can be financial. It can be in your health, which we'll talk about in a minute. It can be a lot of different things. It can be sacrificing personal relationships. It can be stress. It can be any number of things. So what we need to really, what I really want to do here is just kind of bring this stuff out, because I don't think it's recognized enough. And I don't know that it's talked about enough. And I think it needs to be talked about more, particularly among women, because one of the things that we can do to help alleviate potentially some of this problem is to support the people that are doing the caretaking, to help them out, to give them a social circle or give them somebody to vent to, or offer to help them by taking over a shift or taking over a task or whatever it is. So there are things we can do. So Carolyn says, and I think this is a good comment, I could not work for another while taking care of my mom. I have my own business so I can stop my day, not always what I'm able to do every day to get her where she needs to go. So Carolyn has a really good point here that, owning your own business gives you the freedom to say, well, I need to go and take mom to the doctor, or I need to go get her groceries, or I need to go pick up her prescriptions, or I need to take dad to his physical therapy appointment, or whatever it is. But the downside to that is all the time that you're spending taking dad or mom or aunt or uncle or whoever it is that you're helping where they need to go is time that you're not spending creating or running jobs or prospecting clients or coming up with new products or whatever it is that you need to do. And I want to say here that we also need to include people who are taking care of children right now, because COVID has messed that up to a degree that is insanely insane. I mean, I know people who are getting voluminous amounts of emails every day that their kid has been exposed to COVID, that the teacher is out because of COVID, that their kid needs to have a COVID test before they can come back to school. So then they have to go find a COVID test. And it ends up being a round robin of, my kid is exposed, I got to go find a test. So we have to wait to get a test because tests aren't always available. Or there's a really long line to get a test. So you spend 3 hours to get your kid tested so they can go back to school. And then the next day you do the whole thing again. And, that's not to say that there aren't fathers that are doing this, but disproportionately, the number of people who are standing in those lines with their children to get them tested are mothers. So, and Carolyn makes another good point here. And this is something but my siblings see this, owning her own business, as why she gets to be the caretaker. So that's another thing that happens sometimes. I know it happened with me when my mother was ill. My sister at the time was married. She had 3 young children at that point. And I was unmarried and didn't have any kids. So it was assumed that I could be more available. I could drive down after work and stay overnight and get up at the ass crack of dawn the next morning and drive back home so I could go to work the next day. I could come and stay the weekend. I could do that kind of stuff. I could drop everything and go to Ann Arbor when my mother had a blood clot because my stepdad wanted someone to be with them. and it was assumed that I could do it. And don't even get me started on that. And I'm sorry, I need to do a little nose blow here. I don't know what's up with me today, but anyway. So that's also true. If you own your own business, the assumption might well be that you're more flexible. If you're unmarried, this assumption might be, well, you don't have kids, you don't have, well, if you're unmarried and don't have kids. I mean, if you're divorced and you don't have kids, that's a different, and you have kids, that's a different thing. But if you're someone in my position, unmarried, don't have kids, the assumption is that you have all the time in the world to be able to caretake other people. And the sacrifices that you make may not be, what's the word I want to use? I don't want to say appreciated because I don't think that's the right word, but may not be seen in the same light as someone who has kids and a husband and a family of their own. So that's an issue too that can be a problem, that caregivers who are single and don't have kids of their own, there may be less of a realization that they have a life, that the demands that caregiving makes on them are going to take a toll, because it's just assumed that, well, you don't have anything else to do, as though having children is the only other reason that you wouldn't be available all the time. So there's a lot of attitudes and a lot of cultural thinking and a lot of assumptions. Carolyn just said assumed here. Yep, there we go. That, and I'm going to read Lisa's comment here. A friend of mine from high school has recently turned into a caregiver for his wife who has early onset Alzheimer's dementia. Oh, that's nasty. He is fortunate to have a supportive company and local family so he can partially work from home, but the emotional strain I can only watch from 1,700 miles away is insane. All I can do is be a friend and non-judgmental sounding board. And yeah, I had an aunt who died mid last year who had dementia, and kind of the same thing. I was closer, but they weren't really communicating with me about what they needed. So it was, an elderly uncle and an aunt, and she was getting sicker and nobody was telling me. And he did have help, thank God. But, there's that stress of knowing that things are happening, but not really knowing what they are. And the stress also of wanting to help, but not sure how much you can help or how much you should help. There's a lot of variations on this whole caregiving thing. And especially, I don't want to say especially because I think any caregiving situation is hard, but I know dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's can be especially tough because the person you're caregiving for can often forget who you are. Or like in my aunt's case, she was with it enough to understand that she was losing it, but she wasn't with it enough to take care of herself. So she felt horrible because she was putting this burden on everybody else, but she couldn't do anything about it. And which is an awful thing to watch someone that you care about go through that, where they understand that there's problems that are being caused by their mental state, but they can't do anything to fix them. And they just know it's going to get worse. And that's just seriously awful. And Cindy says, we are running into this with my husband's mom. One of our daughters that works with us stays every night with her. Then we pick her up every morning to go to work. Thankfully, she lives a block away. So you make accommodations. As Cindy says, one of her daughters goes and stays with her grandmother so that she's safe at night, which is a wonderful thing. But again, you can't go out and have a beer if you're caretaking for someone. You can't go out with friends if you're caretaking for someone. If you have to be there every night to look after this person who potentially could get sicker, could have an episode, there's a lot of stress involved in that. And sometimes the person that you're caretaking for doesn't always get it either. I remember when my mom was ill, I would go down on weekends, and a lot of times my stepdad would take advantage of the fact that I was there to go have a beer with the neighbors, or to go fishing, or to go for a drive, or to just go do something, because he knew that I was there and I would take care of things. And my mother didn't always get that. She wanted him to be there with her. And I finally had to explain to her that he loves you and he's taking excellent care of you, but he just needs a break. He needs to go somewhere else and be something else for a little bit. And he knows I'm here. He knows I'll take care of you. And it wasn't that she was necessarily being selfish, but at the same time, yeah, she probably was a little bit, because she was scared and he made her feel better. And she really, we didn't really talk about it, but it was pretty apparent fairly early into the process that this was a process that was ending one way. It wasn't something that she was going to recover from. So there was that too. So there's a lot of varying things that come into this. There's the attitude of the person who's being cared for. There's the demands on the caregiver. There's the attitudes of other people who could potentially help with caregiving, but don't, for whatever the reason. And there's a couple good comments here. Carolyn says, and if you don't ask for help, trust me, others will not always offer. I have now become more able to ask and not feel bad about it if they are not able to. And I think that's a huge point right there, that you cannot be a martyr to it. If you have siblings, if you have friends, if you have cousins, whatever it is, reach out and ask for the help. Let them know what you're trying to do and ask, can someone make a meal? Can someone run an errand? Can someone do some of this stuff so it's not all sitting on you? And it's tough to do that. It's hard to ask for help, especially when you know that maybe people don't really want to help, but you still need to do it. And Lisa Shaw made the point, and we will talk about this a little bit later, that self-care for the caregiver is so important. But I want to throw some more stats at you, because I think there's some other things we need to talk about here. And one of these things is the health consequences of being a caregiver. The toll that caregiving takes is not just financial, which I think we all realize. So women who are caregivers have higher levels of depression, anxiety, and other mental health challenges. And they also find that studies have found that men respond to caregiving responsibilities in a fundamentally different way. Women tend to stay home to provide time-consuming care to one or more ill or disabled friends or family members, while men respond to loved ones' needs for support by delaying retirement because they think they need to make money so they can pay for care. So women can be in the thick of it all the time. You can be with someone who maybe isn't intentionally demanding, but is demanding a certain level of care, and you're the only one that can supply it. That's a lot. That takes a huge toll on your physical and mental health. One 4-year study found that middle-aged and older women who provided care for ill or disabled spouses were almost 6 times as likely to suffer depressive, that's hard to say, or anxious symptoms as those who had no caregiving responsibilities. The same study found that women who cared for ill parents were twice as likely to suffer from depressive or anxious symptoms as non-caregivers. 1 in 5 female caregivers aged 18 to 39 said that stress was nearly always present in their lives, nearly twice as many as those who were not caregivers and for male caregivers. The negative impact on carers' relationships and social networks due to their reduced ability to participate in activities outside their caring role can lead to carers experiencing social isolation, which in turn can impact their physical well-being. So there's a lot of implications for a caregiver's health here. You've got higher levels of stress. You've got higher levels of depression and anxiety. You've got higher levels of perhaps physical health issues that manifest because you're stressed and you're unhappy and you're depressed. All these things can come part and parcel with being a caregiver for someone. And all these things fall disproportionately in the laps of female caregivers, which is yay, woo, yippee. So let's see what else we have here. Various studies have identified other common hallmarks of women's caregiving experience: a higher level of hostility and a greater decline in happiness for caregivers of a family member, greater increases in symptoms of depression, less personal mastery, and less self-acceptance. So that ain't great. And high caregiving related stress. So you've got a lot of mental health issues that are happening here. And mental health can be an issue for a lot of middle-aged women anyway. And then you add caregiving into the mix, and the mental health stress gets even bigger. So, and let's not even factor in the fact that if you're already prone to these things, depression, anxiety, any kind of mental health issue that you might have, you're now adding another burden on top of the burden you already had. So this can become a very messy and complicated situation. The physical impact of providing care can also lead to long-term care needs for the caregiver. For example, a national survey found that 21% of female carers had mammograms less often. As many as 2 out of 3 older women do not take advantage of preventive health services due to lack of information and high out-of-pocket costs. 25% of women caregivers have health problems as a result of their caregiving activities. Coronary heart disease is one physical risk factor of caregiving. Women who spend 9 or more hours a week caring for an ill or disabled spouse increase their chronic coronary heart disease risk twofold. So that ain't great. Other health effects include elevated blood pressure and increased risk of developing hypertension, lower perceived health status, poorer immune function, slower wound healing, and increased risk of mortality. So you're caring for somebody else and you're trying to give them the best care possible. And in the process of trying to care for them, you're hurting your own health, which could turn into a vicious cycle of you're the caregiver for someone else. That caregiving responsibility subsequently ends because most likely the person passes on, and then you need care because you have ruined your health caring for somebody else. Now, we hope this doesn't happen, but for a lot of people, for a lot of women, we have been taught that caring for ourselves comes after caring for everyone else. So if you're not going to the doctor when you should, if you're not dealing with stress the way you should, if you're ignoring your own health issues, if you're financially not able to attend to your health issues because you're helping out an elderly parent, if you feel stressed and frazzled all the time, if your social relationships have collapsed somewhat because you aren't able to go out and have a drink with the girls or go to book club or do whatever it is that you normally do with your friends, then you may not have people to vent to. You may not have people to, excuse me, to support you. So it really ends up being a vicious circle and kind of a mess. And that ends up being a real problem because we all know that support is very important when you're dealing with a tough situation. You need people you can vent to. You need people you can talk to. You need people that you can ask for help. And if you can't maintain your friendships because you're spending all your time taking care of someone, or you're trying to fit in taking care of someone and working and taking care of children and, having a romantic relationship and whatever else it is, something's got to give. And most likely socializing with your friends is probably going to be the first thing that's going to go because it's I don't want to say it's the least necessary, but in a lot of people's minds, it probably would be the least necessary, or the thing that I'll do if there's time, but there's just never time. So there's a lot of potential mental and physical health issues that it just ends up being a real mess. And I don't know who this is, Sorry, I can't see your name, Facebook user. You can try going to StreamYard.com/Facebook and see if they will show me your name. But the comment is, been there, done that, couldn't do it anymore, hardest time in my life. And yeah, that's completely true. And here's another fun fact for you, or not so fun. Minority and low-income caregivers have even more problems when they are doing caregiving. So the additional challenges for them, the poverty rate for single African American women over the age of 65 is 30.7%. For single Hispanic women, it's 40.8%. And for people who are in this situation, for those types of caregivers, accessing paid sources of care may be particularly difficult. In fact, lower income caregivers are half as likely as higher income caregivers to have paid home health care or assistance available. So not only do they not have funds, they don't have money, so they're worried about maybe paying their mortgage or keeping their pantry stocked or whatever it is. They also aren't able to access home health services that you need to pay for, which could alleviate some of their burden because they don't have the funds. One study concluded that the caregiving time burden falls most heavily on lower income women. 52% of women caregivers with incomes at or below the national median of 35% spend 20 plus hours each week providing care. So let's parse that out for a minute. You're probably working at a minimum wage job, or you're working at one that's slightly more than minimum wage. You need all the hours you can get just to pay your mortgage and keep yourself fed, and you have to spend a disproportionate amount of time caregiving for someone. That's a scenario where you can't win. No matter what you do, you can't win. And the demands and the stress must be huge. So this is where I have a little issue sometimes, because I've been following the information that's available about the Family Medical Leave Act and paid medical leave and all that sort of stuff, things that could really help women who are caregivers, and certainly could help low income women who are caregivers, who could provide them with some sort of financial safety net that could perhaps provide them with services that would help them with their caregiving duties. And people protest this, and it may never pass. They may never be able to get a bill to pass. And I don't understand that, because this is only something that's going to get worse. We're all aging. This is a dilemma that's going to be facing people for a very long time. And why would you not try to make it easier for people that are dealing with burdens of caregiving? I don't understand that. I wish I did, but I don't. So add to all this, as though this wasn't enough fun already, the situation we've been in for the past couple of years, which is COVID, where elderly people who are in the high risk population have needed someone to bring them groceries and pretty much anything else they needed, because they couldn't go out and do things for themselves, even if they were able-bodied and healthy and mentally right on the ball and ready to do things. They perhaps couldn't do it because they may be high risk due to just age. And then you have also children who are needing to be tested for COVID currently, because the Omicron is so contagious, it's popping up everywhere. And before that, we had kids who couldn't go to school. So school was happening online and kids were home all the time, and someone needed to police that and make sure they were doing their schoolwork and make sure that all that stuff was happening. And again, the burden disproportionately fell on women. So if you look at the stats about women caregiving during COVID, and I've got some more stuff for you. Okay, so more than 65 million women provided unpaid care in the form of childcare, family care, and elder care during 2020. A majority of these women did so while holding full or part-time jobs. More than half, nearly 35 million of these women, were also mothers of children under the age of 18. 72% of these mothers were also in the labor force. So historically, caregiving by women has been undervalued, but this year it has just really brought home to all of us the value of caregiving, because so much has happened since the pandemic began. And it also underscores the critical need for paid family and medical leave and other policies to support caregivers. So let's see. 6 months into the pandemic, nearly 6 in 10 women said that handling childcare responsibilities during the pandemic had become somewhat or very difficult. More mothers than fathers felt like they couldn't give their all at work, needed to limit work hours, or turn down promotions or important projects because they have children. Wow. So that's really not great. I mean, when you think about it, the pandemic has just really messed us up in a lot of ways. So I want to read you another stat here. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development reports that the U.S. women's unpaid childcare hours have increased to an average 31.65 hours per week. This is nearly 8 hours more per week than men on average. Altogether, mothers in the U.S. spent more than 57 million hours on unpaid child caregiving in 2020. And pandemic caregiving has also pushed mothers out of the labor force. In April 2020, labor force participation for mothers of young children dropped by 3.4 percentage points, compared to 2.9 percentage points for fathers. So this is really not good. And this is, again, why we need paid medical leave, paid family leave. We need support for people who are doing caregiving, because as we're seeing in all these stats that I've been throwing at you like a maniac, caregiving disproportionately impacts women. And women are, as we should already know, also suffering from the fact that they are making less than men on average, that they can get mommy tracked and not be in line for promotions and other things because they have children. So we're already facing a disproportionate amount of obstacles anyway. And then let's throw in, oh, hey, here's the pandemic, and we're not going to support you while you're trying to handle the demands of the pandemic. And we're not going to support you while you're trying to handle the demands of caring for your parents or other elderly family members. And we're just going to expect you to handle all this and do it well, and do it without sacrificing your mental health, your physical health, or your financial health. Good luck with that. So Carolyn says, once we glean out 80-year-old rich guy politicians, we might see more change, as they do not see value in caregiving. Possibly. I think there are a lot of people who, well, and this is a good question too, not to be a Debbie Downer, but who is to pay for the paid leave? I haven't followed the proposal. And honestly, I have to say, Wendy, I'm not entirely sure on that either. I would assume it would be some form of taxation, or Social Security maybe. I don't really know. And that's something I need to look at a little bit closer. But I think it's a discussion we need to be having. Even if we don't know how we're going to do it, we need to be having the discussion about how we could do it and why it matters. Because I think it is going to matter. It's going to matter increasingly. And it's not, if you haven't had the experience, it's maybe something you haven't thought about. If you had the experience and the experience is now over, you may not have thought about it in a while. I have to say, this topic was brought back up to me because my father is having health issues, and my sister basically said, we probably need to talk about this. And I was like, okay. And honestly, other than knowing that I'm not going to have my father live with me, I hadn't really thought about having to do anything, which, what are the options? Do we get in-home care if he needs it? Do we send him? Does he go to a nursing home? Does he go to assisted living? What is he going to want? All that kind of stuff. And then you have to also fold in the fact that, and this is a little subset of things that can happen for some people. What if you are a spouse or a sibling, or not a spouse? What if you're a daughter or a sibling or whatever that isn't necessarily very close to your family? How do you parse out what your caregiving responsibilities are then? Do you have an obligation to care for someone who maybe didn't particularly care all that well for you? These are things you have to figure out. There's a lot of weight that goes onto that. And honestly, if somebody knows the answer to that one, I wish they would tell me, because I sure as heck don't. And I'd like to. It's a whole nother dimension in things when you aren't necessarily close to your family, and you don't necessarily have the best of relationships, to try to parse out what you owe, I guess, or what you'll feel comfortable doing, is a whole different kettle of fish. So that can be a fun little side cul-de-sac for some people who do caregiving, which is, what do I owe the people who maybe didn't take care of me as well as they should have? So that's another thing that you need to think about. But here's the other half of this equation. So we know that caregiving, I read you the stats. Caregiving is physically demanding, it's mentally demanding. Caregivers can neglect themselves. They can have higher instances of mental health issues. They can have higher instances of physical health issues. So as of yet, there is currently no monetary help for them. There are no programs in place governmentally to help caregivers. So what can you do? First thing you can do is go look at a few of the sites that I found. Caregiving.org resources is a list of resources for caregivers, and it could be ways to find financial help. It could be support, mental health help. So if you are doing caregiving, you might want to go check this out. Caregiveraction.org is another support group. Again, worth checking out. If you're just starting your caregiver journey and you're not sure what your options are or what you want to do, nextstepInCare.org can help you figure out what your options need to be and what the possibilities might be and how you can structure your caregiving experience. So that might be a good place to help if you're just taking your first steps into caregiving for someone. And wiserwomen.org is about women who were setting up for retirement, and they have a section about retirement resources for caregivers. So that might be something to go look at too, to ensure that you're not sacrificing your retirement to help someone else in theirs, basically. And the other thing, as Lisa Shaw said earlier, I believe it was Lisa, yes, self-care for the caregiver is so important. We've talked about self-care on this show before, and I'm probably going to talk about it again, because a lot of women, and hi, I'm one of them, are really, really bad at this. We are taught from a very early age, a lot of us, that our job is to care for children, to care for other people, to take care of our spouses, to make sure that everybody else is cared for and covered, and look at ourselves and look out for ourselves last. And what often happens is, as we saw in the stats, you sacrifice your mental and your physical health looking out for other people. So what can you do to make sure that that doesn't happen to you? One thing, ask for help. That's kind of a no-brainer. Ask for help and keep asking for help until you get it. And if that means you have to go online and look at the sites that I was showing you earlier to try to find programs that might help you, that could be one thing you could do. If that means finding spouses or cousins, or finding your spouse or your cousins or your siblings, or whoever else you can find, and asking them, can they help you? And it doesn't necessarily have to be with the caregiving that you're doing. It could be, can you cook a meal for my family? Can you pick up the kids from soccer practice? Spread out the tasks that need to be done and make sure that everything isn't sitting in your hands, because that's just not a tenable situation. That's not something that's sustainable long term. If everything relies on you, it's not going to work long term. So you need to be able to ask for help. And I know asking for help is hard. Believe me, I suck at it. I totally suck at it. But it's something we all need to learn to do. And we all need to admit that we need help, because the alternative is you burn yourself out and then you can't help yourself and you can't help anybody else. And that's not good. So don't do that. Ask for help. Insist on help. Let other people know that you're not asking. You need help and they need to help you. And like I said, and I'm going to run through these URLs one more time. You can check out the resources on caregiving.org. You can also look for support on caregiveraction.org. If you're just starting your caregiving journey, nextstepandcare.org has some useful information that may help you figure out what you want to do. And certainly if you're planning to retire, wiserwomen.org would be a really good website to check out. And you can get some tips if you're a caregiver and looking to retire there. And the other thing is, demand time to take care of yourself. If you like bike riding, if you like reading, if you just need a bath with some bath salts and some candles, if you want to go and have a date night with your husband, whatever it is, demand that happen. Part of what women do, and I've done this, so I know it, is we think, well, when there's time, or, well, things will ease up and I'll be able to do the stuff I want, or whatever it is. You can't wait, because if you wait, what ends up happening is you now have mental or physical health issues and you can't do the things you want to do, or you don't feel like doing the things you want to do. So just don't sacrifice yourself. That's not what caregiving should be, and it's not what we want it to be. And just because we're told that our needs are the least important doesn't mean it's true. So don't do it. Another thing is, try to maintain your social relationships. And that could be asking your friends, hey, can we meet at my house for, wine and cheese? Or can book club meet at my house? Or, hey, I only have 45 minutes, but I'd love to get together and get tapas and a drink or something, whatever it is. Or turn online. We know from the Women in Garment Decoration group, and I'm going to throw that banner up. We know from the Women in Garment Decoration group that during the pandemic, especially, online relationships became really important, and having a safe space where you can vent and where you can talk to people and where you can ask for support can be really, really helpful. It doesn't have to be WIGD, though if you want to come join us, you are more than welcome. But find a group of people who like the things you like. Look for caregiver support groups. They're certainly out there where you can talk to people and maybe get ideas and maybe get help from people who are dealing with the same things that you're dealing with. All these things are important. And especially with the pandemic, we've learned that while interacting online isn't exactly the same as interacting in person, it can provide a lot of the same qualities. It can give you someone to talk to. It can give you someone to vent to. It can give you someone to laugh with or cry with or whatever you need. It can give you a safe space, depending on what group you're in, where you can vent about things, and potentially, if the group is private, it can be a place where your family or the person you're caring for or whoever it is won't be able to see what you're saying. And don't underestimate the value of those places, because the ability to get out the issues that you're having can be really, really helpful. So look for caregiver groups, caregiver support groups. Look for hobbyist groups. Look for places where people that do the things you like to do are congregating, and go there. Even if you can only spend half an hour once a week, at least it's something different. So Cindy has a point that also happens. My husband is from a family of 4 boys. Only 2 live near mom. So the other 2 just expect the others to deal with all the caregiving issues. And the 2 that live here are self-employed. And yeah, that happens a lot too. Like we were talking about earlier, you find that if you aren't married or if you live closer, the assumption is that you'll just handle it because you're there. And in those cases, I honestly think there needs to be a discussion that, okay, can the ones that live further away contribute toward paying for some help to come in? Or, can they fly in or drive in one weekend a month and help out or whatever it is? The assumption is always that somebody else is going to do it a lot of the time. And I think what happens is that you care about the person you're caregiving for. You want to help, and you don't want to make waves, especially if you're female. Now, in Cindy's case, she's talking about it's all sons, but you don't want to make waves. So you end up kind of just letting it ride and hoping that other people are going to step up. Sometimes you need to have a conversation. I will say this about my sister, and I appreciated it, even though I was kind of like, oh crap, I hadn't really thought about that. But she was very forthright in saying, we need to have a talk about this because potentially there could be some negative consequences of what he was hospitalized for. What are we going to do if that happens? We need to have a discussion. And she lives near him. So, and she's, I assume, closer to him than I am. But, she's right. There's 2 of us. We need to have this discussion. How are we going to handle this? What are we prepared to do? What are we not prepared to do? What does he have in place? That's another question that you need to be asking. What does the person who needs the care have in place? What's their insurance like? What will it cover? What plans have they made? What do they want? There's a whole just litany of things. And what's really sad about this is that for a lot of people, this comes up very suddenly. Somebody gets sick, somebody goes to the hospital, somebody gets diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia or whatever it is, and suddenly there's this whole new thing that nobody expected or planned for, and now you have to deal with it. So you cobble together some sort of plan because you don't really have any time to do anything else. And then you end up in situations where your siblings that are far away assume you're going to handle everything because you're there. Or your daughter ends up spending every night with her grandmother instead of going out and having a life. There are things that happen. And everybody's just doing the best they can. And I would assume that most people who are caregiving are not resenting it. They're not saying this is so unfair and this is so horrible. They're saying, I love the person. I want to help them. But there's also a little bit of that too. It's the damn demanding thing to have to do. And it can be a long-term demanding thing to have to do. So we need to acknowledge that. So, it's a tangled issue, and this is not something that we're ever going to figure out in this little amount of time that we have here. I just really wanted to get a couple of things across. One is that the burden of caregiving falls disproportionately on women, that there are physical and mental health issues that can accompany caregiving, that there are resources available, though not yet paid medical leave or paid family leave, that those are things we should be looking at how to make happen because it could be very beneficial to a lot of women. And we need to value caregiving more. And we need to realize that the burden of it is disproportionately falling on women and figure out how to alleviate that. There's a lot of issues involved in this. I don't claim to even begin to know how to solve all of them. And I'm not really trying to do that here. I just wanted to bring up the topic. I mean, we can see from the comments that we have here while this has been going on, that there are a lot of people dealing with this issue, and some people talk about it and some people don't. I do want to say, if you are a member of Women in Garment Decoration, or if you'd like to become a member, please do come and feel free to talk about the issues that you're dealing with. We're here to support. We're here to help. I am losing my voice and we're almost at an hour. Thank you everybody for being here today. Not sure what next week's show is going to be. I'm talking to some people. I'm looking at some topics. It could be me solo again. It could be a show with a guest. Tune in next week and find out. Thank you everybody for being here today. Thank you for sharing your stories with me. And I will talk to you next Wednesday. Bye now.